Picture this. You're standing in a grocery store parking lot. Your ex-husband pulls up in a $70,000 Mercedes. His new fiancée is young enough to be his daughter. And he actually laughs at your 10-year-old car, mocks you, humiliates you, makes you feel like nothing. That was Diane's rock bottom moment. 52 years old, living in a tiny apartment above a Thai restaurant, working her first job in 29 years, counting pennies, having panic attacks, wondering how her life had gone so completely wrong. But here's what Richard didn't know. While he was laughing at her poverty, he was drowning in debt. His mansion, mortgaged 3 times over. His company, a house of cards about to collapse. His wealth, a performance, a lie, a disaster waiting to happen. And Diane, she was about to do something absolutely brilliant, something that would flip the script entirely, something that would turn his cruelty into her greatest victory. Because sometimes the woman you underestimate is the most dangerous one in the room. And sometimes revenge isn't about destruction, it's about reclamation. This is the story of how Diane went from mocked ex-wife to mansion owner, how she turned humiliation into power, how she stopped being small and started being unstoppable. Stay with me, because what happens next will make you believe in second chances, in justice, and in the power of a woman who finally stops apologizing for existing. This is her story, and trust me, you don't want to miss a single moment. The screech of tires on asphalt cut through the afternoon air. Jesus Christ, Diane, you're still driving that piece of junk? Diane Hartwell froze. Her hand gripped the grocery cart handle so tightly her knuckles turned white. She knew that voice. 28 years of marriage had imprinted every inflection, every tone, every subtle variation into her nervous system, like a brand she couldn't scrub away. She turned slowly. Her ex-husband stood beside a gleaming silver Mercedes. The late afternoon sun caught the chrome accents and threw light like a spotlight. Richard had his arm draped possessively around a blonde woman young enough to be his daughter, Vanessa, the fiancée. Diane had seen the engagement announcement on Facebook 3 months ago, posted by their mutual friends who hadn't bothered to unfriend her first. "Hello, Richard." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. Small victories. Richard circled her decade-old Honda Civic like a predator assessing wounded prey. The paint had faded from deep blue to a dusty blue-gray that reminded Diane of storm clouds. A ding marked the passenger door. She'd gotten it in a parking lot 2 years ago and never bothered to fix it. The back bumper held a faded sticker from Owens College. She couldn't quite bring herself to scrape it off. "Honey, is this the car?" Vanessa's voice carried that particular pitch of false sweetness, like artificial sugar. "The one you told me about?" Richard laughed, actually laughed. The sound echoed across the parking lot. "The very same. I offered to buy her something decent in the divorce. She refused." That wasn't how it happened. Diane's fingers tightened on the cart handle. Metal bit into her palm. He'd offered her $12,000 for a vehicle, half of what a reliable used car actually cost. Meanwhile, he'd kept his Mercedes, his Porsche, the Range Rover he'd bought the year before he asked for the divorce. "I have what I need," Diane said quietly. Clearly. Richard's eyes traveled from the car to her off-brand jeans, then to her discount store jacket, the one she'd bought at a warehouse sale because her good winter coat was still at the dry cleaners. She couldn't afford to pick it up yet. His smile didn't reach his eyes. It never had. How had she never noticed that before? The March wind cut through her thin coat. She shivered. Next week. She'd get her good jacket next week when her paycheck cleared. "Well, we should go." Vanessa tugged at Richard's arm. Her diamond ring caught the afternoon sun. The stone had to be at least 3 carats. "We have that appointment with the caterer." "Of course." Richard opened the Mercedes door for his fiancée with exaggerated gallantry. Like a performance. Everything with Richard was a performance. The wedding's in June. At the estate, naturally. The estate. Their estate. The 8,000 square foot mansion that had been Diane's home for 23 years. The house where she'd raised 2 children. Hosted countless dinner parties. Perfected her garden until it was featured in the local home and garden magazine. Created a life she'd thought would last forever. The house Richard kept in the divorce. He'd convinced the judge it was his business asset. His home office was there after all. Never mind that Diane had managed every detail of that house for over 2 decades. Scheduled the repairs, coordinated the landscaping, managed the housekeeper and the pool service, and the endless maintenance that a property like that demanded. Enjoy it, Diane heard herself say. Richard paused, halfway into his car. What was that? I said enjoy it, the house, the wedding, all of it. Something flickered across his face. Confusion, maybe, or surprise that she'd spoken at all. For most of their marriage, Diane had perfected the art of saying nothing, of smiling and nodding and making herself smaller so Richard could feel bigger. Oh, we will. He slid into the driver's seat. The leather made a soft sound. Try not to let that car break down on you. I'd hate to have to come rescue you. The Mercedes pulled away. Its engine purred, a sound of expensive German engineering and wealth and everything Diane used to have. The exhaust left a faint cloud that dispersed slowly in the cold air. Diane stood in the parking lot, one hand still on her grocery cart, watching her former life drive away in a $70,000 vehicle. She tried to remember if she had enough gas to make it home. The gauge had been sitting just above empty for 2 days. Her phone buzzed. A text from her best friend, Trish. Coffee tomorrow? My treat. Diane typed back quickly. I'll bring the bagels. She couldn't afford coffee shop prices anymore. But she'd be damned if she'd admit it, even to Trish. Especially to Trish. Her friend had a good job, a stable marriage, a life that hadn't imploded. The parking lot began to empty around her. People heading home to their families, their comfortable houses, their lives that made sense. The sun was setting earlier now. Soon it would be dark. She still had to drive across town to her apartment, the one-bedroom place above the Thai restaurant, the one that made her clothes smell like curry and fish sauce no matter how often she washed them. She loaded her groceries into the trunk. Store-brand everything. Generic cereal, off-brand coffee, the cheapest pasta on the shelf. She'd become an expert at calculating unit prices in her head, stretching dollars until they screamed. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was Bethany. Mom, can you send me money for textbooks? Dad said to ask you. Of course he did. Richard made 4 times what Diane earned at her new job. Her first job in 29 years. But somehow their daughter's textbooks were Diane's responsibility. Somehow everything had become Diane's responsibility, except the things that actually mattered. She sat in her car, took 3 deep breaths. The air was cold. Her breath fogged the windows. She locked the door, then unlocked it, then locked it again. Her hands were shaking. 28 years of marriage, 2 children, countless dinner parties where she'd smiled and played the perfect hostess, where she'd laughed at Richard's jokes, charmed his clients, made him look good. She'd managed his household, raised his children, maintained his image, built his empire from the shadows while he stood in the spotlight. And now she lived in a 1-bedroom apartment that smelled like pad thai, drove a car held together by prayer and duct tape, got mocked in grocery store parking lots by the man who'd promised to love her until death. The engine sputtered. Once, twice, 3 times. Please, she whispered, not today. The Honda started. It always did. Eventually stubborn and reliable, like her, like she used to be, before Richard, before the divorce, before her entire life collapsed into a single room above a restaurant. Diane pulled out of the parking lot. The check engine light glowed softly on her dashboard, a warning she couldn't afford to heed. She'd looked up the diagnostic code online, something about the oxygen sensor. The repair would cost $300. She didn't have $300. She drove home through rush hour traffic, past the nice neighborhoods, past the houses with 2-car garages and manicured lawns, past the life she used to live. Her apartment building was sandwiched between the Thai restaurant and a laundromat. The stairs to her unit were on the outside of the building, metal and rust. They clanged when she climbed them, announced her presence to anyone within earshot. She unlocked her door. The apartment was dark. She hadn't left any lights on. Electricity cost money. Every penny mattered now. Every decision was calculated against her dwindling bank account. Diane set her groceries on the small kitchen counter, unpacked the generic cereal, the off-brand coffee, the discounted produce from the clearance bin. Her refrigerator hummed loudly. The noise kept her awake some nights, but the landlord said it worked fine. No repairs needed. She sat on her second-hand couch, the one she'd bought at a yard sale for $50. It smelled faintly of cigarettes and someone else's life. She pulled out her phone, stared at Bethany's text message. Dad said to ask you. Of course he did. Of course Richard would take their daughter to Giovanni's, would order the expensive wine, would play the generous father, and then tell Bethany to ask her mother for textbook money. Diane opened her banking app. $412. Payday was Friday. Rent was due Tuesday. She had exactly enough to cover rent and utilities. Nothing left over. Nothing for textbooks. Nothing for emergencies. Nothing for the check engine light that glowed like a prophecy in her car. She typed a response. I'll send what I can. Then deleted it. Tried again. Ask your father. He can afford it. Deleted that too. Finally settled on, I'll transfer something Monday. She'd eat ramen for a week. She'd skip lunch at work. She'd figure it out. That's what mothers did, what ex-wives did, what women did. They figured it out. They made it work. They sacrificed. And men like Richard went to Giovanni's. Diane set her phone down, looked around her apartment. The walls were thin. She could hear her neighbors. The couple next door arguing. The television from upstairs. The endless bass from the bar 2 blocks over. This was her life now. This was what 52 looked like after 28 years of marriage to a man who traded her in for a newer model the second their youngest left for college. She stood, walked to her bedroom, pulled out the photo album she'd rescued from the divorce. Richard hadn't wanted them. Why would he? They were evidence of a life he'd already rewritten in his mind, but Diane couldn't throw them away. Not yet. Maybe not ever. They were proof that she'd once mattered, that she'd once had a life that extended beyond these 4 walls and the smell of curry. She opened the first album, their wedding day. She'd been 24, fresh out of college. Sure, she'd found her person. Richard in his tuxedo, her in the dress she'd sewn herself. They couldn't afford the ones in bridal shops. His parents had been horrified. Eleanor had actually cried. My son marrying a girl who makes her own wedding dress. Diane had learned to embroider Eleanor's criticism into her skin, learned to smile through it, learned to prove herself worthy through perfection, through being the perfect wife, the perfect mother, the perfect hostess. And it had never been enough. She closed the album, slid it back under her bed, out of sight. She'd look at them again next month, maybe. Or maybe she'd finally be strong enough to throw them away. Her phone buzzed. A text from Owen. Hey, Mom, Dad says you're upset about running into him. He's worried about you. Diane stared at the message, read it 3 times, felt something cold and hard settle in her chest. Richard was worried about her. Richard, who'd left her with minimal alimony, who'd kept the house and the investments in most of their mutual friends, who'd just publicly humiliated her in a parking lot. That Richard was worried. The audacity was breathtaking. She didn't respond. What could she say? That she was fine? That would be a lie. That she was falling apart? That would make her children worry. That their father was a manipulative bastard who'd weaponized their concern? That would force them to choose sides. Diane set her phone face down on her nightstand, lay down on her bed, stared at the ceiling, counted the water stains. 7 stains that the landlord had promised to fix. 7 stains that marked the boundaries of her new life. Tomorrow she'd go to work. She'd smile at Gerald. She'd balance his spreadsheets. She'd pretend everything was fine. She'd eat lunch at her desk. She'd come home to her apartment above the Thai restaurant. She'd repeat the cycle. This was surviving. This was what came after. This was the rest of her life. The bass from the bar started up, rhythmic, relentless. It would continue until 3 in the morning. Diane pulled her cheap comforter up to her chin, closed her eyes, waited for sleep that wouldn't come easily. Richard's laughter echoed in her head. You're still driving that piece of junk? She'd loved that man, built a life with him, sacrificed her own ambitions to support his career. She'd wanted to teach once. Before Richard, before marriage, before children, Before, she'd made herself smaller and smaller until she'd nearly disappeared, and he'd looked at her like she was pathetic. The worst part, she'd felt pathetic, standing in that parking lot in her discount jacket and her worn-out shoes, driving her decade-old car with the check engine light glowing. She'd felt exactly as small as he'd wanted her to feel. Diane opened her eyes, stared at the ceiling. The seventh water stain looked like a map, or maybe a warning. She couldn't tell which. Sleep wouldn't come tonight. She knew that now. She'd lie here until morning, listening to the bass, smelling the curry, feeling the weight of 52 years and a failed marriage, and a life that had somehow gone so completely wrong. Tomorrow she'd get up. She'd survive another day. That's what she did now. She survived. One day at a time, one humiliation at a time, one parking lot encounter at a time. This was her life now, and she had no idea how to make it better. The apartment was silent except for the rhythmic thud of bass from the bar 2 blocks over. Diane sat cross-legged on her bedroom floor at 2:17 in the morning. Photo albums surrounded her like evidence at a crime scene. She'd been sitting here for 3 hours, sorting, remembering, trying to figure out which memories were real and which were lies she'd told herself. Here, their wedding day. She'd been 24, fresh out of college with a degree in education she'd never used. Richard in his tuxedo, her in that homemade dress. She could still remember the feeling of the fabric. Satin she'd bought on sale. Lace from a craft store. Hours of work to save money. Eleanor's face at the ceremony, pinched, disapproving, like she'd swallowed something bitter. My son, marrying a girl who makes her own wedding dress. Diane had spent the next 28 years trying to prove Eleanor wrong, trying to be worthy of the Hartwell name, trying to be enough. Next photo, Bethany's birth. Diane exhausted but glowing. Richard standing slightly apart from the hospital bed, already checking his pager. Even then, even at the birth of their first child, he'd been somewhere else in his mind, building his empire, making his plans. Owen's first birthday. The house they'd bought when Richard's firm made him partner. Christmas cards, Halloween costumes, soccer games, dance recitals, a marriage in photographs. A life documented in careful detail. But which ones were real? She picked up her phone. Her thumb hovered over Richard's contact. She should delete it. Why hadn't she deleted? What possible reason could she have for keeping his number? The urge hit her suddenly, violently. Call him, demand answers, ask the questions that kept her awake at 3 in the morning. When did you stop loving me? Was it sudden or gradual? Did you plan this? Did you ever actually love me at all? She locked her phone, unlocked it, locked it again. The gesture felt familiar, pathetic. How many times had she done this exact thing? In parking lots, in bathrooms at work, in line at the grocery store. This compulsive checking, this addiction to pain, this need to reach out to the person who'd destroyed her. Stop, she told herself out loud. Her voice sounded strange in the empty apartment, hollow. When had she started talking to herself? When had that become normal? When had she become the kind of person who sat on bedroom floors at 2 in the morning, having conversations with no one? A car alarm went off somewhere outside, shrill, insistent. Someone's problem, someone's emergency. The Thai restaurant's exhaust fan kicked on below her. The smell of fish sauce drifted up through the vents, through the walls, into her lungs. This was her life now. This was what 52 looked like. 28 years of marriage to a man who'd traded her in the second their youngest left for college. No, that wasn't fair. Richard had probably been planning his exit for years, probably had contingency plans, escape routes. He was good at that, good at planning, good at strategy, good at making sure he came out on top. The photos mocked her from the floor, every smile suddenly suspicious, every family vacation possibly hiding an affair. Had there been others before Vanessa? Of course there had been. She just hadn't wanted to see it, hadn't wanted to admit that her perfect life was a carefully constructed lie. Her phone buzzed, a text from Owen. Hey Mom, Dad says you're upset about running into him. He's worried about you. Diane stared at this message. Read it once, twice, 3 times, felt something cold and hard settle in her chest like a stone, like ice, like truth she didn't want to acknowledge. Richard was worried about her. Richard, who'd left her with minimal alimony and a car that barely ran, who'd kept the house and the investments and most of their mutual friends, who'd just publicly humiliated her in a grocery store parking lot in front of his young fiancée. That Richard was worried. The manipulation was breathtaking, beautiful almost, in its audacity. He'd managed to make her the problem, the one who couldn't move on, the bitter ex-wife who couldn't handle seeing him happy. He'd rewritten the narrative so completely that even their son believed it. She typed, "I'm fine, go to sleep." Deleted it. Tried again. "Tell your father I don't need his concern." Deleted that too. Finally, "All good, love you." The lies came easier now. She'd become fluent in them. Fine, good, okay. All the small words that meant nothing, that covered everything, that let her children sleep at night while she sat on bedroom floors sorting through the wreckage of her marriage. She gathered the photos back into their albums, careful not to bend the corners. These were her children's history too, even if that history was contaminated now, even if every smile hid a lie, even if the whole thing was a performance. The bedroom window looked out over the parking lot behind the building. Her Honda sat under a broken streetlight, one tire slightly flat. She'd been meaning to fill it for 3 days, but the gas station air pump cost $1.50, and that felt like a luxury she couldn't quite justify. $1.50 for air. That's what her life had become. Calculations about whether she could afford to inflate a tire. This was the thing nobody told you about divorce. Not the lawyers with their billable hours, not the therapists with their coping strategies, not the well-meaning friends who brought casseroles for the first 2 weeks then went back to their own lives. They didn't tell you about the slow bleed of dignity, the constant calculations, the way you start measuring your worth in the price of air for your tires, in the cost of coffee, in whether you can afford to pick up your coat from the dry cleaners. They didn't tell you that you'd become a person who sits on floors at 2 in the morning, talking to yourself, sorting through photos, trying to figure out where it all went wrong. Diane closed the photo albums, slid them under her bed, out of sight. She'd look at them again next month, probably. Maybe, or maybe she'd finally be strong enough to throw them away, to let go of the evidence, to stop trying to solve a crime that had no solution. Her alarm was set for 5:30. 3 hours of sleep if she fell asleep right now. If sleep came. If her brain would stop spinning. If Richard's laughter would stop echoing in her head. She didn't fall asleep right now. Instead, she lay in the dark, listened to the bass from the bar, the occasional shout from the street, the endless loop of her own thoughts, the what-ifs and the should-haves and the how did I not sees. You're still driving that piece of junk? She'd loved that man, built a life with him, sacrificed her own ambitions to support his career, to raise his children, to maintain his home, to be his partner, his helper, his support system, his invisible infrastructure. And he looked at her like she was pathetic, like she was nothing, like 28 years of marriage meant less than the price of her car. The worst part wasn't the humiliation. It was that she'd felt it was deserved. Standing in that parking lot, in her discount jacket, driving her old car, she'd felt exactly as small as he'd wanted her to feel, exactly as worthless, exactly as pathetic. Some part of her had believed him. Some part of her still believed him, that she wasn't enough, that she'd never been enough, that he'd done her a favor by marrying her in the first place. The bass from the bar finally stopped at 3 o'clock. The sudden silence was worse than the noise. In the silence, her thoughts got louder, more insistent, more cruel. Diane rolled onto her side, pulled the cheap comforter up to her chin. The fabric smelled like the discount store where she'd bought it, like other people's returns, like desperation in clearance racks and making do. She closed her eyes, waited for morning, for the alarm, for another day of pretending everything was fine, another day of surviving, another day of this life she hadn't chosen. This life that had been chosen for her. Tomorrow she'd get up. She'd shower in the tiny bathroom with its low water pressure. She'd drink the off-brand coffee. She'd drive her old car to her new job. She'd smile at Gerald. She'd balance spreadsheets. She'd come home. She'd repeat the cycle. This was it. This was the rest of her life. And she had no idea how to make it better. No idea how to become something more than a woman who sat on the floors at 3 in the morning, sorting through photos, talking to herself, measuring her worth in the price of air. The water stain on the ceiling looked different in the dark, less like a map, more like a stain, just a stain. Nothing meaningful, nothing significant, just damage that no one would fix. Like her life, like everything. Diane waited for sleep, for mercy, for something to change. But nothing changed, nothing ever changed. The base would start again tomorrow night. The curry smell would persist. The water stains would remain. Her car would keep running on prayer. Her bank account would stay empty. Her children would worry. Richard would laugh, and she would survive. Because that's what she did. That's all she did now. Survive. One day, 1 hour, one moment at a time. In her apartment above the Thai restaurant, with her photos under the bed, with her dignity measured in dollars and cents, with her future looking exactly like her present. Forever and ever and ever. Trish was already seated when Diane arrived at the coffee shop. 2 large cups steamed on the table between them. The morning light filtered through the windows, made everything look softer than it was. You said I was buying, Diane protested. She slid into the booth. The vinyl was cracked, patched with duct tape. I lied. Sit down. Drink. Trish pushed one of the cups toward her. Diane wrapped her hands around the cup. The warmth felt like a small mercy, like forgiveness, like something she didn't deserve but needed anyway. You look terrible, Trish said. You're supposed to say I look fine. We're past that stage of friendship. You look like you slept on a floor surrounded by divorce paperwork and old wedding photos. Only half right, there wasn't any paperwork. Trish pushed a paper bag across the table. Blueberry muffin. Eat it. I'm not watching you waste away on principle. They'd been friends since college. Roommates junior year, when Diane was still dating Richard and Trish was dating a psychology major named Timothy, who would later come out as gay at their 10-year reunion. They'd survived bad boyfriends, worse haircuts, the particular hell of being young women in the 1990s. But this was different. Divorce had created a gap between Diane's life and Trish's comfortable marriage. Trish meant well. Everyone meant well. But they went home to partners and houses and lives that weren't falling apart. They went home to normal, whatever that meant. So, Trish said carefully, Richard, I don't want to talk about it. The parking lot incident? Trish, he's an asshole. That's not news. No, Trish leaned forward. Her voice dropped. Serious. I mean, he's a specific kind of asshole. The kind who's about to get what's coming to him. Something in her voice made Diane look up, made her pay attention, made the coffee shop sounds fade into background noise. Trish pulled out her phone, opened a folder, slid it across the table. I've been doing some research. Research? I'm a financial advisor, honey. It's literally my job to investigate people's money. And I got curious about Richard's situation. Diane stared at the phone. Spreadsheets filled the screen. Documents. Official-looking forms with the county seal in the corner. Numbers that made her eyes hurt. You investigated my ex-husband? I investigated a potential financial fraud. The fact that he's your ex-husband is just a bonus. Trish's smile had teeth in it. Sharp. Dangerous. Look at the second tab. Diane scrolled. Numbers swam in front of her eyes. Mortgages, loans, credit lines, all with Richard's name attached. All stamped with dates, amounts, terms. The paper trail of a man drowning in debt. I don't understand. Your ex-husband is broke. The words didn't make sense. They couldn't make sense. That's impossible. He has the Mercedes, the house, all mortgaged, all leveraged, all about to come crashing down. Trish took a long sip of her coffee. Richard's been playing shell games with his company's money for at least 5 years, taking out loans against properties, using that money to buy new properties, mortgaging those to cover the loans on the old ones. It worked fine when the market was good. But now, Diane sat motionless. The coffee shop's sounds returned slowly, like volume turning up. The hiss of the espresso machine, the clatter of dishes, the murmur of conversation. Outside the window, a woman laughed with her child. They looked happy, light, uncomplicated. Diane couldn't remember the last time anything felt that light. How broke? Her voice sounded hollow. The mansion alone has 3 mortgages on it. He owes more than it's worth. And his business properties? Same story. The bank's been patient because Richard's good at talking. But even they have limits. Diane thought about the Mercedes, about Vanessa's ring, about the wedding being planned at the estate, about Giovanni's restaurant and expensive wine and playing the generous father while telling Bethany to ask her mother for textbook money. He doesn't know, she said slowly, the realization dawning. Vanessa doesn't know. Nobody knows except Richard and his accountant. And now us. Trish pulled her phone back. I shouldn't have looked this deep. Technically, some of this is privileged information, but I was so angry after hearing about the parking lot incident, and I just started digging. And how long does he have? Before the bank forecloses? 6 months, maybe 8 if he finds new investors. But honey, there are no new investors. Everyone in real estate knows Richard Hartwell is a bad bet. The coffee had gone cold in Diane's hands. She took a sip anyway. Bitter, like everything else lately. Like truth, like reality, like the taste of 28 years of lies. He took the house in the divorce because it was his business asset, Diane said. The pieces clicking together. He convinced the judge it was essential to his company. It was, as collateral. He couldn't afford to lose it because he'd already borrowed against it twice. I signed papers during the divorce. He had me sign papers about releasing my interest in his business assets. Standard divorce procedure. So you have no claim on his properties or his debts. Trish reached across the table, gripped Diane's hand, which is actually good news. When he goes under, you're not going down with him. Diane pulled her hand back. This doesn't feel like good news. Give it time. Outside the window, the mother and child were gone. The sidewalk was just sidewalk again. Gray, ordinary, empty. He mocked my car, Diane said quietly. Yesterday, in front of his fiancée. He made me feel like I was nothing because I drive a 10-year-old Honda, and the whole time he's drowning in debt. Broke people often act the richest. Trish gathered the coffee cups, the muffin bag, the casual debris of their conversation. It's all performance, image. The minute people see the cracks, the whole thing collapses. Why are you telling me this? Because you've been walking around for 6 months looking like a woman who lost something valuable. Trish met her eyes, held her gaze. You didn't lose anything, Diane. You escaped. They sat in silence for a moment. The coffee shop hummed around them. Other people's conversations, other people's problems, other people's normal Wednesday mornings. I need to go, Diane said finally. I have work. The bookkeeping job, it pays the bills. Barely. It's what I have. Trish opened her mouth, closed it, tried again. If you need money, I don't need money, I need dignity. Diane stood, grabbed her purse. The fake leather was cracking. She'd bought it at a discount store. Thank you for the coffee and the information. I don't know what to do with it, but thank you. Diane, I'll call you later. She walked out of the coffee shop into the cool morning air. Trish's revelations sat in her chest like stones, like weights, like truth that changed everything and nothing at the same time. Richard was broke. The mansion was mortgaged 3 times over. The life she'd mourned losing was already gone. Even if Richard didn't know it yet, even if Vanessa didn't know, even if the whole world still believed the performance. Her Honda was parked half a block away. The dent on the passenger side caught the morning light, made it look worse than it was. Or maybe exactly as bad as it was. She'd stopped being able to tell the difference. She'd bought this car with her own money. Well, with the pathetic settlement Richard had given her. But still, it was hers, paid off, no loans, no mortgages, no leveraged debt, No shell games, no performance. It was ugly and old and ran on hope and duct tape and prayer. But it was real, it was honest. It was exactly what it appeared to be. Unlike Richard, unlike their marriage, unlike everything she'd built her life on. Diane got in her car, started the engine. It caught on the first try, a small miracle. She sat for a moment, hands on the steering wheel, staring at nothing. I'm not crazy. Those late-night work calls were exactly what I thought they were. The validation whisper came unbidden, unwanted, but true. She'd known. Some part of her had always known. She'd just been too invested in the lie to admit it, too committed to making it work, too afraid of what it would mean if she acknowledged the truth. Her phone buzzed. Gerald, her boss. Everything okay? You're usually here by now. On my way, sorry. She pulled out of the parking spot, drove to work through morning traffic, past the nice neighborhoods with their two-car garages, past the houses with manicured lawns, past the life she used to live, the life that had been a performance, a lie, a house of cards waiting to fall. Richard's house of cards, not hers. She was free of it now, whether she'd wanted to be or not. The thought should have felt liberating, but it just felt empty, like everything else, like the space between what was and what might have been, like the gap between the life she'd thought she had and the life she actually lived. Diane parked in the lot behind Palmer and Associates, sat in her car for a moment. The building looked the same as always, perpetually under renovation, perpetually not quite finished, like her life, like everything. She got out, locked the door, walked to her job, to her desk by the window, to her work, to the thing that kept her afloat, to the life she'd built from the wreckage of her marriage. And somewhere in the back of her mind, a seed planted itself. Small, barely noticeable, but there. Richard was broke. The mansion would go to foreclosure, and when it did, someone would buy it at auction. Someone would own her former home, her garden, her life. Why not her? Why not Diane? The thought was absurd. She could barely afford groceries. She wasn't buying mansions at auction. She wasn't rescuing anything. She was just surviving. One day at a time, one paycheck at a time, one moment at a time. But still, the seed was there, planted, waiting, growing. The accounting firm of Palmer and Associates occupied the third floor of a building that had been under renovation for as long as Diane had worked there. 3 months, 92 days of learning QuickBooks and pretending she understood what a general ledger actually did. Morning, Diane? Gerald Palmer looked up from his desk as she entered, 60-something, bow tie, reading glasses perpetually sliding down his nose. He'd hired her despite her complete lack of experience. You raised 2 children and managed a household, he'd said in the interview. That's more complex than most businesses I work with. Morning, Mr. Palmer. Gerald, we've been through this. They had been through this every morning for 3 months. Diane couldn't break the habit of formality. It felt like a shield, like protection, like something between her and the world that could keep her safe. Her desk was in the corner, near the window that overlooked the parking lot. Not much of a view, but it beat staring at the water-stained wall near Gerald's office. She booted up her computer, pulled out her list of tasks, tried to focus, but Trish's words kept circling back, like birds, like vultures, like truth she couldn't escape. Richard's broke. The mansion is mortgaged to the ceiling. He's drowning. How was she supposed to work, and her entire understanding of the last 6 months had just shifted? When everything she'd believed about the divorce had been revealed as another layer of lies. Diane, Gerald was standing by her desk. You all right? You've been staring at that screen for 10 minutes. I'm fine. Sorry, just tired. Well, when you're done being tired, I need you to look at the Morrison account. Something's not balancing. Of course. He lingered, concerned. You know, if you're having trouble with the work, I'm not. I'll figure it out. There's no shame in asking for help. That's what we do here. We help each other. Diane nodded, not trusting her voice, not trusting herself, not trusting anything anymore. Gerald returned to his office. Diane forced herself to focus on the Morrison account. Numbers, invoices, receipts. The tedious, meticulous work of making everything add up, of finding the mistakes, of balancing the books. She'd always been good with numbers. In another life, before Richard, before marriage, before children, she'd considered accounting as a career path, but then love happened. And marriage, and babies, and the years disappeared into carpools and PTA meetings and maintaining Richard's image. 28 years of unpaid labor. That's what Trish had called it once. You were his executive editor, personal chef, social coordinator, property manager, and childcare provider. If he'd had to pay someone to do all that, he couldn't have afforded his lifestyle. The Morrison account finally balanced at 11:30. Diane saved the file, stood up. Her legs were stiff. She'd been sitting for 3 hours straight. She headed to the bathroom. The sink was dirty, toothpaste splatters, water spots, someone's mess that no one had cleaned. Without thinking, she wet a paper towel, started cleaning, scrubbing at the spots, making it better, making it right, making it. She stopped, stared at herself in the mirror. This wasn't her bathroom. This wasn't her mess. She didn't work here as a janitor. She was a bookkeeper, an employee, a professional. This wasn't her job. This wasn't her responsibility. But her hands had automatically started cleaning because that's what she'd done for nearly 3 decades. Seen a mess, fixed it, seen a problem, solved it. Never mind if it was her responsibility. Never mind if anyone thanked her. Never mind if anyone even noticed. She'd been Richard's fixer, his problem solver, his invisible support system, the person who made everything work while he took all the credit, and he'd left her anyway. And she was still here, still cleaning, still fixing, still making herself useful, so maybe someone would want to keep her around. I spent 28 years making myself smaller so he could feel bigger. That ends now. Diane threw away the paper towel, left the sink dirty, walked out of the bathroom with her head high. The afternoon passed in a blur of spreadsheets and phone calls. At 4:15, Gerald called her into his office. Close the door. She did, her stomach tightened. Was she being fired? Had she made some catastrophic error? Was this it? Was she losing the one thing that kept her afloat? Sit down, Diane. She sat, perched on the edge of the chair, ready to run, ready to beg, ready to do whatever it took. Gerald removed his glasses, cleaned them with his tie, put them back on. The ritual seemed to take forever. I'm going to say something, and I need you to actually hear me. Okay. You're good at this job, better than good. You're meticulous, careful. You catch errors before they become problems. In 3 months, you become invaluable to this office. Diane felt tears prick her eyes. Thank you. Don't thank me. I'm not being nice, I'm being accurate. He leaned forward. But I watch you shrink every time someone walks past your desk. I watch you apologize for asking questions you have every right to ask. I watch you try to make yourself invisible. She had no response to that, no defense, just truth sitting between them like a living thing. Whatever happened in your marriage, and I'm not asking, it's not my business. You need to understand that this job isn't a favor. You earn this position. You're keeping this position because you're good at it, not because I feel sorry for you. I didn't think, yes, you did. His voice was gentle but firm. You think everyone's doing you a charity. You think you're one mistake away from being thrown out. I recognize it. My sister did the same thing after her divorce. Took her 5 years to stop apologizing for existing. Diane's throat felt tight, like someone was squeezing it, like she couldn't breathe. Take the compliment, Diane. You're good at your job. You deserve to be here. And stop cleaning the bathroom sink. She laughed, surprising herself. You saw that? I see everything. I'm 67 years old and bored. Your drama is my entertainment. That's terrible. Agreed. Now go home. It's Friday. Do something fun. Fun? When had she last done something fun? When had fun been a possibility? When had anything felt light enough to be called fun? Diane gathered her things, said goodbye to Gerald and the 2 other accountants she barely knew, headed to her car. The Honda started on the first try. Another small miracle. She was collecting them now. These tiny victories, these moments when things worked. She sat in the parking lot, engine running, phone in hand, Trisha's revelations sat in her message history like a grenade, like a bomb, like information that changed everything. Richard's broke. She could do nothing with this information. It changed nothing about her life, really. She still had her apartment, her car, her tiny existence above the Thai restaurant, but it changed something internally. Some equation she'd been running in her head about worth and value and who won the divorce, about who came out on top, about who was successful and who was pathetic. Richard hadn't won. He'd just performed winning more convincingly, and she'd believed the performance, just like she'd believed everything else, just like she'd believed in their marriage, in their life, in the fairy tale she'd been living. Her phone buzzed. Bethany. Dad's taking me and Owen to dinner at Giovanni's tonight. He wants to check in. Can you send money for textbooks by Monday? Giovanni's, the Italian place where entrees started at $40, where wine cost more than her weekly grocery budget. Richard was taking their children to an expensive dinner, playing the generous father, while asking Diane to cover textbooks. She typed, "I'll send what I can." Deleted it. Tried again. "Ask your father, he can afford it." Deleted that too. Finally, "I'll transfer something Monday." She'd eat ramen for a week, skip lunch at work, make it work somehow, because that's what mothers did, what ex-wives did, what women did. They made it work. They stretched dollars. They sacrificed. They went without so their children wouldn't. And men like Richard went to Giovanni's, ordered expensive wine, played the hero, let someone else pick up the pieces. Let someone else make the hard choices. Let someone else sacrifice. Diane pulled out of the parking lot, drove home through Friday afternoon traffic, everyone heading into their weekends, their fun, their normal lives, their worlds that made sense. She parked behind her building, climbed the metal stairs. They clanged under her feet, announced her presence, told the world she was home, back to her apartment above the Thai restaurant, back to her life. Inside, everything was the same. The thin walls, the loud neighbors, the smell of curry, the water stains on the ceiling, the cheap furniture. The evidence of her failure spread across 400 square feet, but something felt different. Some small thing had shifted. Some tiny crack had opened in the foundation of her despair. Richard was broke. The mansion would go to foreclosure. And when it did, Diane set her purse down, made herself a cup of off-brand coffee, sat on her second-hand couch, pulled out her phone, started Googling foreclosure auctions, county sales, bank seizures, the process, the timeline, the requirements, what it took to bid, what it cost, what was possible. The information felt overwhelming, impossible. She could barely afford groceries. She wasn't buying houses at auction. She wasn't rescuing anything. She was just surviving. But still, she kept reading, kept researching, kept learning, because maybe, just maybe, there was a way, there was a path, there was something she could do besides survive. Maybe she could win, not by luck, not by charity, but by being smarter, by being prepared, by being the person Richard never thought she could be, the person she'd forgotten she was, before him, before marriage, before making herself smaller, before 28 years of serving someone else's ambitions. Diane Monroe. Not Diane Hartwell, the woman who'd wanted to teach, who'd been good with numbers, who'd had dreams before she'd set them aside for someone else. That woman was still in there, buried, beaten down, but not dead. Not yet. Maybe not ever. The curry smell drifted up through the vents. The bass would start soon from the bar. Her neighbors would argue. The water stains would stay. Nothing would change. Nothing ever changed. Except maybe it could. Maybe it would. Maybe she could make it change. The seed Trish had planted was growing, taking root, becoming something real, something possible, something that looked almost like hope. Diane kept reading, kept learning, kept planning. Friday night in her apartment above the Thai restaurant, alone, broke. But for the first time in months, not defeated. Not yet. Not tonight. Not ever again. Parents' weekend. Diane had forgotten about it until Bethany's reminder text arrived at 7 in the morning. Saturday, her only day to sleep in. Her only day to not think about spreadsheets and bills and how to make it through another week. Mom, you're still coming, right? The presentation starts at 10. Of course, the presentation. Bethany's economics project, the one Diane had heard about in exactly 3 phone calls and 0 in-person conversations. Because seeing her daughter meant risking encounters with Richard, meant performing normal, meant pretending everything was fine. I'll be there, Diane texted back, then spent the next hour figuring out what to wear. The closet in her apartment was half the size of her old walk-in. Most of her nice clothes had stayed with the house. Richard's suggestion during the separation. You won't need cocktail dresses in your new place. He'd been right. She needed work clothes and worn jeans and sweaters that didn't quite fit anymore. Weight loss from stress, from an inability to afford groceries and appetite at the same time, from the constant knot in her stomach that never quite went away. She settled on black pants and a blue blouse, only slightly faded, professional, presentable, the kind of outfit that wouldn't embarrass her daughter, that wouldn't announce to the world that she was failing, that she was broke, that she was barely holding on. The drive to the university took 45 minutes. Highway, then surface streets, then the winding campus roads. Diane arrived with 15 minutes to spare, parked in the visitor's lot, and then couldn't make herself get out of the car. Her hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white, breathing shallow. The paralysis she'd come to know well, the inability to move forward or backward, the frozen state of existing without living. This was Bethany's school. Diane had helped her daughter fill out applications, agonized over essays, celebrated the acceptance letter. But she'd only visited campus twice, once for orientation, once for move-in day, both times before the divorce was finalized, before everything fell apart, before this became her life. Richard had probably been here dozens of times, taking Bethany to lunch, meeting her friends, playing the proud father, living the life of the successful parent whose child was thriving at university. And Diane had been, where? Working, surviving, trying to figure out how to exist as a single woman after 28 years of being someone's wife, after 28 years of defining herself through someone else. A knock on her window made her jump, heart racing, panic rising. Owen stood outside her car, concern creasing his forehead. When had he gotten so tall? When had he become a man? Mom, you okay? She rolled down the window. Fine, just checking my phone. You've been sitting here for 10 minutes. I watched you pull in. Had it been 10 minutes? Time did strange things lately. Stretched and compressed without warning. Disappeared in moments. Dragged on for hours. Refused to behave the way it should. I'm coming. Just needed a minute. Owen opened her door. Bethany's nervous. She'll feel better when you're there. They walked toward the economics building together. Her son matching his pace to hers. Protective. Careful. When had he started looking at her with that particular blend of worry and protectiveness? That used to be her job. Looking after him, protecting him, keeping him safe. Dad's already inside, Owen said carefully. With Vanessa. Of course. Of course Richard had brought his fiancée to their daughter's presentation. Of course he was introducing Vanessa to Bethany's world. Staking his claim, building his new family. Moving on while Diane sat paralyzed in parking lots. That's fine. Mom, it's fine, Owen. I'm fine. Stop asking if I'm fine. They entered the building. The economics department had set up rows of chairs facing a small stage. Students milled around, chatting with parents, adjusting presentation boards. The buzz of normal families doing normal things. And there, front row center, sat Richard and Vanessa. Richard's arm was draped casually across the back of Vanessa's chair. Possessive, claiming. She was laughing at something on her phone. Her blonde hair caught the fluorescent light, made her look young, fresh, uncomplicated. They looked like an advertisement for successful middle age. Attractive, affluent, unburdened. Diane took a seat 3 rows back. On the aisle, escape route, just in case. Owen hesitated, torn between his parents, then sat beside her. You don't have to. I'm sitting here, Mom. Bethany appeared from backstage, saw Diane, her face lit up, pure, uncomplicated happiness. That expression made the entire drive worth it, made the paralysis worth it, made everything worth it. But then Bethany saw the seating arrangement, saw her mother alone in the third row, while her father and his fiancée occupied prime position. Her smile faltered, dimmed, became something else. It's okay, Diane mouthed. Bethany didn't look convinced. The presentation started. 6 students, each analyzing different economic theories. Bethany spoke about market corrections, about bubbles and crashes, about the danger of over-leveraging assets, about what happens when debt exceeds value, when reality crashes into fantasy. Diane listened with new understanding, with Trisha's revelation echoing in her head. Richard's company is a house of cards. Was this coincidence? Or had Bethany chosen this topic because she'd seen something, noticed something, had questions she didn't want to ask directly? The presentation ended to polite applause. Parents swarmed the stage, proud, beaming, congratulating. Richard got there first, of course, pulled Bethany into a hug, said something that made her laugh. Vanessa stood slightly apart, checking her phone again, always checking her phone. Never quite present, never quite engaged. Diane waited, held back. Let Richard have his moment. She was good at that, holding back, waiting her turn, making herself smaller so others could be bigger. That was really good, Owen said beside her. Beth's presentation. She's always been smart. She gets that from you. She gets a lot of things from me, including the ability to spot financial irresponsibility. Apparently. Finally, Richard and Vanessa stepped away. Diane approached her daughter. Mom! Bethany hugged her tight, fierce, like she meant it. You made it. Of course I made it. I wasn't sure with the drive and everything. Bethany, I wouldn't miss this. Her daughter pulled back, searched her face. You look tired. I'm fine. You're always fine. Well, I am. They stood in the awkward space of things unsaid. Divorce had created new distance between Diane and her children. Not their fault. They were trying to love both parents in a situation where loyalty felt zero-sum, where choosing one meant rejecting the other, where normal family dynamics had become a minefield. Your presentation was excellent, Diane said. The part about market bubbles, that was really insightful. Something flickered across Bethany's face. Recognition. Or maybe fear, or maybe knowledge she wished she didn't have. Yeah, it's interesting how people think they're rich right up until they're not. Very interesting. Dad's taking us to lunch at that new place downtown. You should come. Oh, I don't think, please, Mom, it would mean a lot. How could she say no? How could she explain that watching Richard play happy family with his young fiancée would break something inside her that was barely holding together? That she couldn't afford to eat at expensive restaurants? That she'd have to sit there calculating every bite against her bank balance? Of course, Diane heard herself say. I'd love to. The lies came easier now. The restaurant was the kind of place that didn't have prices on the menu. Diane knew this trick. It meant expensive. It meant you were supposed to not care about money. Because caring about money was gauche, was common, was something that separated the haves from the have-nots. She'd been to dozens of restaurants like this during her marriage, had learned to order the second cheapest entree. So she didn't look cheap, but didn't look extravagant either. Had mastered the art of fitting in with people who'd never worried about a light bill, who'd never calculated the cost of air for their tires. Now she sat at a table with her ex-husband, his fiancée, their 2 adult children, and calculated the cost of every item that arrived. Appetizers, $70. Wine, $45 per glass. Richard ordered a bottle, $180. Entrees, $38 to $65 each. Her checking account currently held $412. Payday was Friday. Rent was due Tuesday. She had exactly enough to cover rent and utilities. Nothing left over. Nothing for this lunch. Nothing for emergencies. Nothing for the check engine light still glowing in her car. Mom, try this. Bethany pushed a plate toward her. It's amazing. Diane took a small bite of something involving truffle oil and microgreens. Ingredients she couldn't pronounce. Preparations she didn't understand. It tasted like expensive air, like privilege, like a world she'd once been part of but no longer belonged to. Delicious, she said. Richard was holding court at the head of the table, telling a story about a difficult client, how he'd solved the problem, saved the day, made everyone happy. Vanessa laughed at the right moments, touched his arm, played her role perfectly. Diane recognized the performance. She'd given it for 28 years. So, Diane, oh, Vanessa said suddenly, Bethany tells me you're working now? That must be such an adjustment. The words were innocent. The tone was not. The subtext clear. You have to work now. You're not one of us anymore. You've fallen. How embarrassing for you. It's fine. What kind of work? Bookkeeping. Oh, that's wonderful. It's so important to have a purpose after, Vanessa paused delicately, after a major life change. Owen's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. Bethany's eyes went wide. The table went quiet. Tension thick enough to cut. Richard said nothing, just sipped his wine. Watched. Waited to see what Diane would do, how she would react. If she would make a scene. Yes, Diane said carefully, maintaining composure, refusing to give him the satisfaction. Purpose is important. I couldn't imagine going back to work at my age, but then I've been fortunate to maintain my career throughout. Vanessa smiled, sipped her wine. Richard and I met at the firm, actually. I was in commercial properties. Was? Diane asked, catching it, the past tense. A flicker of something crossed Vanessa's face. Uncertainty, or maybe fear, or maybe the beginning of awareness that something wasn't quite right. I'm taking time off to plan the wedding, so much to coordinate. I'm sure. The wedding. The expensive wedding at the 3 times mortgaged mansion. Did Vanessa know? About the debt, the loans, the house of cards? Of course she didn't know. Richard was too good at performing success, at maintaining the image, at making everyone believe the fairy tale. Diane had believed it for 28 years. The server arrived with entrees. Diane's salmon sat in a puddle of something described as reduction. She had no idea what that meant. It looked expensive. It probably was expensive. Everything here was expensive. Everyone ate, made small talk, performed normalcy. This was fine. Everything was fine. They were a modern family, divorced parents who could be civil, adult children navigating it all. Nothing to see here. And then Richard's phone rang. I need to take this. He stood abruptly, stepped away from the table, phone pressed to his ear, his voice low, urgent. Vanessa watched him go. A line formed between her eyebrows. Concern, or maybe suspicion, or maybe the first crack in the performance. Diane watched Vanessa watch Richard. Saw something in that expression. Recognition beginning to dawn. The way prey realizes it's been cornered. The way a mark realizes they've been conned. How long and until the younger woman figured it out? How long and until Richard's house of cards collapsed on her the way it had collapsed on everyone else? Richard returned 5 minutes later. His face carefully neutral, but his hand trembled slightly as he picked up his wine glass. Diane saw it, that tiny crack in the performance, that small tell, that evidence of pressure. The server brought dessert menus. Richard ordered tiramisu without looking at the price. Vanessa asked for the chocolate mousse. Bethany and Owen shared a creme brulee. Diane ordered nothing. Not hungry, Mom? Owen asked. I'm full. That salmon was very filling. She'd eaten maybe half, would take the rest home. Stretch it into 2 more meals, make it last, make it work. The table talk continued around her. Wedding plans, Bethany's summer internship, Owen's new apartment, the ordinary concerns of people whose lives weren't falling apart, whose worlds made sense, whose futures looked bright. And then it hit. The panic. Starting in her chest, a tightness. Her heart rate spiked. Sweat broke out along her hairline. She couldn't breathe. Couldn't focus. Couldn't. The restaurant sounds became overwhelming. Cutlery on plates. Multiple conversations. The birthday song starting at a nearby table. Laughter. Voices. Too much. Everything was too much. Too loud. Too bright. Too real. Too fake. Too everything. Excuse me. She stood abruptly. Chair scraping. Bathroom. She made it to the women's room, into a stall, before the full force of the attack hit. Her heart was going to explode. She was going to die here, in this bathroom. While Richard and Vanessa and her children ate tiramisu, she gripped the stall door, metal cold under her palm, tried to count breaths. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. The technique her therapist had taught her, back when she could afford therapy. It wasn't working. Black spots danced in her vision, her heart pounded, too fast, too hard, too much. She sank onto the closed toilet seat, put her head between her knees. You're not dying. This is a panic attack. You've had them before. You'll survive this. But what if she was dying? What if this was actually a heart attack? Women had different symptoms. Heart attacks in women looked like panic attacks. She'd read that somewhere. What if this was it? What if she died here? In a restaurant bathroom? Alone? The bathroom door opened. Footsteps. Someone checking makeup. Someone washing hands. Someone living a normal life while Diane fell apart in a stall. Mom? Bethany's voice. Concern, fear, love. I'm fine. You're clearly not fine. Open the door. Give me a minute. Mom, please. Diane unlocked the stall. Her daughter stood in the bathroom's harsh fluorescent light, concern etched across her face. When had Bethany become the adult? When had Diane become the child who needed care? You're having a panic attack. I just needed air. You're shaking. Diane looked down at her hands. They were trembling violently, like she'd been caught in a storm, like she'd lost all control. Bethany guided her to the sink, ran cold water, wet paper towels, pressed them to Diane's wrists. Cool, grounding, real. Breathe with me. In, out, in, out. They breathed together. Mother and daughter, roles reversed, everything upside down. Slowly the panic receded. The vice around her chest loosened, her heart rate dropping back toward normal. When did these start? Bethany asked quietly. About 6 months ago. The divorce. Everything, the divorce, the movie, the job, all of it. Mom, I'm fine. Stop saying that. Bethany's voice cracked, raw, angry, scared. You're not fine. You're having panic attacks in restaurant bathrooms. You're working yourself to death at a job you hate to afford an apartment that makes you miserable. You're fine? Diane had no answer, no defense. Just truth sitting between them like a living thing. Dad's an asshole, Bethany said. He's always been an asshole, but you're killing yourself trying to prove you're okay without him. I am okay without him. Then why are you falling apart? The question hung in the bathroom air, fluorescent lights humming, water dripping, time stretching. No answer, no explanation, just the question. Why are you falling apart? I don't know, Diane whispered. I don't know how to do this. I don't know who I am without being his wife. I spent 28 years being Mrs. Hartwell, and now I'm just nothing. You're my mother. That's not enough. It's enough for me. They stood in silence, Diane leaning against the sink, Bethany's hand on her shoulder. Two women connected by blood and love and shared trauma. By divorce they didn't choose. By a man who'd failed them both. Come back to the table, Bethany said finally. We'll get through dessert, and then you can leave. Okay? Okay. They returned to find Richard paying the bill. $340 with tip. He didn't even blink. Didn't hesitate. Just handed over his credit card. Performed generosity. Played the role of successful father. While Diane calculated the cost of therapy she couldn't afford, medication she'd stopped taking, the panic attacks that were stealing her life one bathroom stall at a time. Everyone ready? Richard asked. They filed out of the restaurant into the afternoon sun, light that felt too bright, air that felt too thin, world that felt too real. In the parking lot, Richard pulled Diane aside while the others walked ahead. I'm worried about you, he said. Don't be. Vanessa mentioned you looked unwell. I'm fine. If you need help, I don't need your help, Richard. I need you to leave me alone. His eyes widened slightly. Shock. She'd never spoken to him like that. Not in 28 years of marriage. Not in 6 months of divorce. Never. I'm just trying to, you're trying to feel better about yourself. You want to be the good guy who checked on his struggling ex-wife, but you don't actually care. If you cared, you wouldn't have mocked my car in a parking lot. That was cruel. It was cruel and calculated and exactly who you've always been. I was just too invested in the fairy tale to see it. She walked away before he could respond, before he could perform concern, before he could make himself the victim, before any of it. Her Honda sat at the far end of the lot, alone, ugly, reliable, honest. She got in, started the engine. It caught, always did. She drove home. Richard's expression of shocked confusion fueling something new inside one, not quite anger yet, but getting there, getting close, getting ready. Diane spent Sunday morning at the public library, a beautiful old building with high ceilings and good Wi-Fi. No judgment about people who came in just to use the computers, who couldn't afford internet at home, who needed resources they couldn't access any other way. She'd become a regular. The librarians who knew her by sight now nodded when she walked in, showed her to her preferred computer terminal by the window. Today she had research to do. Trisha's revelation had opened a door. Richard was drowning financially. But what did that actually mean? How bad was it? And more importantly, was there anything Diane could do with this information? She started with public records, property deeds, mortgage filings, business registrations, all available online if you knew where to look. And Diane was learning where to look. The county recorder's office website yielded the first pieces. The mansion, her former home, currently had 3 mortgages attached to its title. First mortgage, $850,000, taken out in 2016. Second mortgage, $400,000, taken out in 2019. Third mortgage, $375,000, taken out in 2022. She did the math. $1.6 million in debt on a house worth maybe $1.2 million in the current market. He was underwater, drowning, just like Trish had said. She moved on to Richard's business properties. His company, Hartwell Development LLC, owns 6 commercial buildings, various states of renovation and lease. Every single one was heavily mortgaged. Every single one showed late payment filings from the last 18 months. The paper trail painted a picture. Richard had been juggling debt for years, using each new property to leverage loans on previous ones, staying one step ahead of foreclosure through aggressive borrowing and charm. But the charm was running out. He made me feel like I was the one who couldn't manage money. The whole time he was sinking. The validation whisper came unbidden. True, real, honest. Richard had positioned himself as the financially savvy one, the businessman, the expert, and Diane as the naive housewife who didn't understand money, who couldn't be trusted with real decisions. All lies, all performance, all manipulation. Diane printed relevant pages, spent $4.50 on copies, money she didn't really have, but information she needed. She drove home with her research tucked carefully in a folder. Her apartment looked different when she walked in. Smaller, yes. Shabbier, absolutely. But also hers, her space, her rules, her life, such as it was. She spread the documents across her kitchen table, organized them by property, by date, by type of debt. This was familiar work. She'd managed household finances for 28 years, tracked expenses, managed budgets, kept everything running while Richard handled the big picture. Except the big picture had been a mirage, a performance, a lie. Her phone buzzed. Owen. Hey, Mom, just checking in. You okay after yesterday? I'm fine. You sure that thing in the bathroom? I'm fine, Owen. Really? A pause. Okay. Love you. Love you too. She hung up and returned to her research. The question wasn't just how broke Richard was. The question was, what happened next? Foreclosure on the mansion would happen when? She Googled the typical timeline. After 90 days of missed payments, the bank could begin proceedings. After 180 days, they could force a sale. Richard's records showed he'd been juggling payments for months, making the minimum on some loans, missing entirely on others, robbing Peter to pay Paul, playing shell games, running out of time. How long until the bank lost patience? She pulled up his business website. Hartwell Development, LLC presented a polished front. Successful projects, satisfied clients, the facade of prosperity. But dig deeper into permit records, into contractor liens, into the small print of public documents. And the cracks showed everywhere. Diane's phone rang. Trish, tell me you're not researching your ex-husband, Trish said without preamble. I'm at the library doing research. That's not a no. It's public information. Diane, you open this door. Don't be surprised when I walk through it. Silence on the other end. Then, what did you find? Everything you told me and more. He's not just broke, he's catastrophically broke. The mansion alone is underwater by at least 400,000. So? So I'm trying to understand what happens when it all comes crashing down. Why? Good question. Why did she care? Richard had made his choices. His financial disaster wasn't her problem. She'd been released from his debts in the divorce. She was free, clean, safe. I don't know, Diane admitted. Maybe I just needed to understand, to see the full picture of what I was living in all those years. Or maybe you want revenge. I don't want revenge. Everyone wants revenge after a humiliating divorce. I just want to understand. But that wasn't quite true, was it? Something else was building inside her, not revenge exactly, more like clarity, purpose, the feeling of being an active participant in her life instead of just surviving from one paycheck to the next. Be careful, Trish said. Richard's a cornered rat right now. Cornered rats bite. I'm not doing anything, just reading public documents. Right, and I'm just a casual observer who happened to do extensive financial research on your ex. We're both sad people. Agreed. Coffee Wednesday? I'll bring the bagels. Diane hung up and returned to her research. By midnight, she'd created a complete picture of Richard's financial empire, or rather his financial house of cards. She organized the documents into folders, created a timeline, cross-referenced property values against debt loads, and realized something. She'd stopped panic cleaning. She wasn't organizing out of anxiety. She was building a case file, creating structure, taking control. For the first time in months, maybe years, she was doing something instead of having things done to her. At 2 in the morning, Diane made her mother's apple crisp recipe from memory. No recipe card needed. The measuring, the stirring, the familiar motions soothed her. Flour and sugar and cinnamon and butter. Simple ingredients making something whole. She ate it straight from the pan, standing at her kitchen counter, watching the sunrise through her window. The sky went from black to gray to pink to gold. The transformation was slow, subtle, beautiful. For the first time in months, she felt calm. Not happy, not hopeful exactly, but calm, centered, like she'd found solid ground after months of drowning. The question remained, what was she going to do with this information? She could do nothing, let Richard's empire collapse on its own. Watch from a safe distance as everything he'd built crumbled. Or she could get involved somehow. Use this knowledge to her advantage. Play the game instead of being played. Diane pulled up the county auction website. Every month, the county held foreclosure auctions. Properties seized by banks, sold to the highest bidder. She'd never paid attention to these before. They were background noise. Someone else's disaster. Someone else's problem. But now she scrolled through listings with new interest. Small commercial properties, residential homes, land parcels, all auctioned off for cents on the dollar when mortgages went unpaid, when lives fell apart, when dreams died. What would happen if the Hartwell mansion ended up on this list? The thought was absurd. She didn't have money for groceries half the time. She wasn't bidding on multi-million-dollar properties. She wasn't rescuing anything. She was just surviving. But still, the thought lingered, grew, became something almost like a plan. Her phone buzzed. 3 in the morning. A text from an unknown number. This is Vanessa. I need to talk to you about Richard. Can we meet? Diane stared at the message. Read it twice, 3 times. Richard's fiancée wanted to meet. The younger woman. The replacement. The one who was supposed to be living the life Diane had lost. The house of cards was beginning to fall. They met at a coffee shop on neutral ground. Not the place Diane and Trish frequented. Somewhere anonymous. Somewhere neither of them had history. Somewhere they could pretend this was normal. Vanessa arrived first, which surprised Diane. She'd expected to be kept waiting. Power play. Establishing dominance. The way women did when they were competing over a man. But instead, Richard's fiancée sat in the corner booth. Makeup minimal. Designer handbag placed carefully on the seat beside her like a shield. She looked smaller than she had at the restaurant. Less polished. More human. "Thank you for coming," Vanessa said as Diane slid into the booth. "I almost didn't. I wouldn't have blamed you." They sat in uncomfortable silence. Two women connected by a man neither of them seemed to like very much at the moment. "I'll be direct," Vanessa said finally. "Richard is lying to me about money." "Yes. You're not surprised. I married him. I know exactly who he is." Vanessa flinched. "Right. Of course. What did you discover? Does it matter?" "It matters to me." Vanessa pulled out her phone, opened a folder similar to the one Diane had been building. "I work in commercial real estate. Did my own research when things started feeling off. The properties he claims to own, they're mortgaged to the ceiling. His company is bleeding money. The mansion where we're supposed to get married, it's going into foreclosure in 3 months. 2 months, Diane corrected. He missed the February payment. How do you... Vanessa stopped, stared. "You've been researching him too." "Public documents." "Right." They studied each other across the table. Two women who should have been enemies. United by their mutual discovery of Richard's deception, by the slow realization that they'd both been played, both been lied to, both been used. "Why are you telling me this?" Diane asked. "Because I don't know what to do." Vanessa's voice cracked slightly, raw, real. "I quit my job to plan this wedding, gave up my apartment because we were moving into the mansion. I've spent the last 6 months reorganizing my entire life around a future that apparently doesn't exist. Welcome to my world. I'm sorry." "For what?" "For," Vanessa gestured vaguely, "for being part of destroying your marriage." "You didn't destroy my marriage. Richard did that long before you showed up." Still, Diane wanted to hate this woman, wanted to enjoy her distress, her confusion, her slow realization that Richard had played her exactly the same way he'd played everyone else. But mostly she just felt tired, empty, done with all of it. "What do you want from me?" Diane asked. "Help? Advice? I don't know." Vanessa wrapped both hands around her coffee cup, like she was cold, like she needed something to hold on to. "You survived him. You got out. How?" "I didn't get out. He left me." "But you survived." "Barely." "Still, you're here. You're functioning. You have a life." Diane thought about her apartment above the Thai restaurant, her panic attacks in restaurant bathrooms, her elderly Honda, her constant calculations about whether she could afford coffee, about whether she could afford to exist. "My life is a disaster," she said bluntly. "But it's yours." "Fair point." "Tell me what you know," Diane said, "about Richard's finances." Vanessa opened her phone, and they spent the next 40 minutes comparing research. Vanessa had access to some documents Diane didn't. Business records, partnership agreements, investor communications. Diane had the historical context Vanessa lacked, how long this had been going on, which problems predated the divorce, which patterns repeated. Together, they built a complete picture. Richard's company was 3 months from total collapse. He'd burned through every line of credit, maxed out every loan, and was now facing a cascade of foreclosures. The mansion would go first, then the commercial properties, then probably bankruptcy. "He's still spending money," Vanessa said quietly. "Just took me to dinner last night. Dropped $500 without blinking. Performing success. It's his survival mechanism." "How long until it all crashes?" "June, maybe July." "The wedding is scheduled for June." "I know," Vanessa laughed bitterly. "I've already spent $15,000 on deposits. Non-refundable. I'm going to lose everything." "Join the club." They sat in shared misery. Two women who trusted the same man. Two women who'd believed the same lies. Two women starting over whether they wanted to or not. "There's something else," Vanessa said. I found emails. Richard's been communicating with investors overseas, promising returns on properties he doesn't actually own. That's fraud. Yes. Have you told anyone? Not yet. I wanted to talk to you first. Why? Because you know him. You know how he thinks, and because, Vanessa paused, because we're on the same side now, whether we want to be or not. Diane had never imagined she'd be sitting in a coffee shop, strategizing with her ex-husband's mistress-turned-fiancé, but here they were, allies, partners, united against a common enemy. I've been Googling you, Vanessa admitted suddenly, for months, since before I knew about the divorce. Richard showed me a photo once, and I kept looking you up, reading about you, trying to understand who you were. Well, Diane stared at her. I did the same thing. Googled you, obsessively, every photo, every social media post, trying to figure out what you had that I didn't. They looked at each other. Both women had been researching each other, both trapped in Richard's web, both trying to understand their place in his story. We're not crazy, Vanessa said softly. We're not stupid. We're women who trusted a man who weaponized our trust. The validation whisper hit different coming from someone else, from the woman who was supposed to be the enemy, from the person who was supposed to make Diane feel worse about herself. The foreclosure auction, Diane said slowly, for the mansion. When it happens, the property will sell for a fraction of its actual value. Okay? Who has access to Richard's business accounts? I do. He added me as an authorized user last month, said it was for wedding expenses. Can you see how much is left? Vanessa checked her phone. 23,000 and change. That's it? That's it, Diane's mind raced. The mansion will probably go for 700,000. Maybe 800 at auction. Banks want to recoup their losses fast. So? So that's still way more than I have. Me too. They sat in silence. The coffee shop hummed around them. Other people's conversations, other people's normal mornings, other people's lives that made sense. Unless, Diane said slowly, we pooled resources. What? You have 23,000 in accessible accounts. I have, she did quick mental math. I could scrape together maybe 30,000 if I cashed out my retirement. That's 53,000. That's nowhere near enough for an auction bid. No, but it's enough for a down payment if we can secure financing. Vanessa stared at her. You want to buy Richard's house? I want to own something that's actually worth something, and that house is worth 1.2 million. If it goes at auction for 800,000 and we can get a mortgage for 750, we'd need 50,000 down. We'd be business partners. Technically, yes. You'd be co-owning property with your ex-husband's ex-fiancé. Technically, yes. Vanessa laughed. That's insane. Agreed. Richard would lose his mind. That's a bonus. They looked at each other. Two women who'd been betrayed by the same man, two women starting over, two women who separately had nothing. But together they might have something, together they might have a chance. I need to think about this, Vanessa said. So do I. Can I call you? Yes. They exchanged numbers, finished their coffee, stood to leave. The meeting was ending, but something had shifted. Some alliance had formed. Some possibility had opened. Diane? Vanessa said at the door. Yes? I really am sorry for my part in all of this. I know. I didn't know about you, about the divorce. He told me you'd separated years ago, that it was amicable. Of course he did. I would never have. I know. Did she know? Did it matter? The past was done, the future was uncertain. But right now, in this moment, they had each other. Two women who understood, who knew, who'd survived the same man. Diane drove home through afternoon traffic, Vanessa's revelations spinning in her head. They could do this. Maybe. Possibly. The idea was insane. The idea was perfect. The idea was the first thing in months that felt like moving forward instead of just surviving. The county foreclosure auction took place the third Tuesday of every month, in a windowless room at the courthouse. Fluorescent lights, folding chairs, the smell of old paper and desperation. Diane arrived 30 minutes early. Her heart should have been racing. should have been pounding, should have been announcing her terror, but instead she felt calm, clear, ready. Vanessa was already there, sitting in the back row, dressed in a sharp business suit that probably cost more than Diane's monthly rent. But she looked nervous, small, human. "You came," Vanessa said. "You doubted me?" "I doubted both of us." They'd spent the last 6 weeks preparing, meeting in secret, planning, researching, securing financing that had seemed impossible but turned out to be merely difficult. Vanessa had liquidated her savings. Diane had cashed out her small retirement account, taking the penalty hit, taking the loss, betting everything on this one chance. Together, they'd scraped together $68,000. A local bank, after extensive paperwork and multiple meetings, had agreed to a $740,000 mortgage if their bid succeeded. Big if, huge if, impossible if. "Did you tell Richard?" Diane asked. "About the breakup? Yes. About this? No." "How did he take it?" "Badly. Accused me of being a gold digger who was abandoning him when times got tough." But Vanessa's smile had teeth in it. The irony was lost on him. The auction room began to fill. Real estate investors, flippers, bargain hunters, people who made their living off other people's disasters, who saw opportunity in foreclosure, who saw profit in pain. Diane should have felt out of place, should have been intimidated, should have been terrified. Instead, she felt calm, centered, done with preparing and hedging and making herself small. She was here to take what should have been hers all along. The panic attacks had stopped 3 weeks ago, somewhere between securing the loan and registering for the auction, somewhere between deciding and doing. She'd stopped being afraid, or maybe she'd just gotten angry enough that fear didn't have room anymore. The auctioneer took his place at the front, a bored-looking man in a cheap suit, someone who'd done this hundreds of times, someone for whom this was just another Tuesday, just another job. Just another collection of broken dreams sold to the highest bidder. "Welcome to the county foreclosure auction. Please note all sales are final and as is. Cashier's check or wire transfer required within 48 hours. Let's begin." He moved through the first few properties quickly. Small lots, distressed homes, nothing that interested Diane. She waited, patient, ready. Then, next item, 1224 Rosewood Drive, 8,000 square feet, 4 bedrooms, 5 baths, situated on 3 acres. Opening bid $750,000. The mansion, her former home, the house where she'd raised 2 children, planted a garden, lived a life. The house Richard had taken from her, the house that was about to be hers again. Diane felt Vanessa tense beside her. "750, Diane called out, her voice steady, clear, strong. Heads turned. She was the only woman bidding, the only woman in a room full of men who thought they knew better, who thought they knew best. 775, a man in the third row. 800, another investor near the front. This was it, the moment they'd planned for. Stretch the bid as little as possible. Hope the property's troubled history would scare off serious investors. Hope Richard's reputation preceded him. 825, Diane said firmly. Silence. Beautiful silence. The auctioneer scanned the room. 825, going once, going twice. 850, the man in the third row again, stubborn, persistent. Damn. 875, Diane countered. 900. The man's voice was confident, too confident. They'd prepared for this, had a strategy. Don't get emotional. Don't exceed the budget. Walk away if necessary. But walking away felt impossible. This was her house, her life, her chance. 925, Diane said. Vanessa gripped her arm. Warning, they were approaching their limit, approaching the edge, approaching disaster or victory, depending. 950, the man said. The room felt very quiet, everyone watching, everyone waiting, everyone wondering how this would end. 975, Diane heard herself say. Vanessa's grip tightened. They were over budget, over plan, over safe. But sometimes you had to risk everything to gain anything. The auctioneer looked at the other bidder. 970. Do I hear 1 million? The man hesitated, checked his phone, made calculations, weighed options, shook his head. 975 going once, going twice. The gavel came down. Sold to bidder number 47. Diane's bidder number. Her number. Her win. They'd done it. Against all odds. Against all reason. Against everything that said this was impossible. They'd done it. The house was theirs. The closing took 3 weeks. During that time, Richard discovered what had happened. He called 14 times. Diane didn't answer. He sent emails. She blocked them. He showed up at her apartment. She called the police. Finally, he showed up at the mansion on moving day. Diane was directing movers when his Mercedes pulled up. The same Mercedes he'd driven when he mocked her Honda. The same Mercedes that represented everything he'd taken from her. Richard got out slowly, staring at the house like he couldn't quite believe what he was seeing. Like reality had finally caught up to performance. Like the fairy tale was over. "You can't do this," he said. "I already did. This is my house. It was your house. Now it's mine. This is revenge. This is real estate." He looked older, thinner. The confident swagger had evaporated, leaving behind a middle-aged man who'd lost his power base, who'd lost his image, who'd lost everything. "Diane, please. We can work something out. I'll buy it back. Give me 6 months." "No. I'll make you a fair offer." "Duo. God damn it, this was my home." "It was my home for 23 years. Her voice didn't rise, didn't need to. "I planted every tree in that garden. I chose every paint color. I raised our children inside those walls. You took it from me in the divorce because you could, because the judge believed your bullshit about business assets. But now it's mine. Legally, completely mine. You did this to hurt me. I did this because it was an excellent investment." She checked her phone. Calm, professional, done with his drama. "The property appraised at 1.3 million. We bought it for 975. That's 325,000 in equity, split between myself and Vanessa." "Vanessa?" His face went pale, actually pale. "Your partner's with Vanessa?" "Yes." "My Vanessa?" "Your ex-fiancée. She's co-owner." Richard actually stumbled, grabbed the Mercedes for support, the performance finally cracking, the mask finally falling, the truth finally visible. You can't. We did. And unless you want to be arrested for trespassing, you need to leave." "Where am I supposed to go?" "That's not my problem." He looked at her like he'd never seen her before, like she was a stranger, like she'd become someone he didn't recognize. "What happened to you?" "You did. For 28 years, you made me smaller, made me doubt myself, made me think I was lucky you'd chosen me. And I believed it." She picked up a box, headed toward the house, her house. "But I'm done being small." "Diane, wait." She turned at the door. One last look, one final word. "Richard, don't contact me again. Any necessary communication goes through lawyers. And if you ever mock someone's car in a parking lot again, remember that they might be researching foreclosure auctions." She walked inside her house and closed the door. On Richard. On her past. On 28 years of making herself smaller. Done. Finished. Over. Diane stood alone in the empty mansion for 10 minutes. Walked through each room slowly. The kitchen, where she'd made thousands of meals. The living room where they'd celebrated holidays. The bedrooms where her children had grown up. Every space held memories. Some good, some bad, all hers. She reached the master bedroom, opened every window, let fresh air sweep through, out with the old, in with the new, out with Richard, in with possibility. 3 months later, the mansion had been transformed. Diane and Vanessa had converted it into a boutique bed and breakfast. 6 guest rooms, professionally managed, profitable, successful, real. Diane lived in the renovated carriage house on the property, small but perfect, hers. completely hers. No one to answer to, no one to make smaller, no one to perform for. Vanessa had taken a consulting position with a competing real estate firm, visited the property monthly to review financials and plan improvements. They weren't friends exactly, but they were partners, allies, two women who turned their mutual disaster into something functional and even beautiful. Diane's phone rang. Bethany, Mom, Owen and I want to visit this weekend. Can we stay at the B&B? Your rooms are already reserved. Family discount. How's it going, really? Really, it's good. Strange, but good. Dad's been calling me. I know. He says you stole his house. I bought his house at a legal auction. There's a difference. I told him that. He didn't want to hear it. Your father rarely wants to hear things that contradict his narrative. A pause. Mom, I'm proud of you. Diane felt tears prick her eyes. Good tears. Happy tears. Tears that meant something other than pain. Thank you, sweetie. Owen is too. We both are. You took something terrible and made it beautiful. After they hung up, Diane walked outside to check on the garden. The roses she'd planted 20 years ago were blooming. She'd neglected them during the divorce, but they'd survived. Stubborn, like her. They'd survived, and now they were thriving. Her Honda sat in the carriage house garage. She'd kept it, not out of necessity anymore. The B&B was profitable enough that she could afford something newer, something better, something that didn't smell like regret and survival. But the car had gotten her through the worst time of her life. It felt wrong to abandon it now that things were better. Besides, it ran fine. It was honest. It was exactly what it appeared to be. Trisha's car pulled up the drive. They had standing coffee dates now, every Wednesday morning, here at the mansion, in Diane's mansion, in the life she'd built from ashes. How's business? Trish called out, getting out of her car. Booked solid through October. And Vanessa? Made partner at her new firm. She's thriving. Richard? Bankruptcy. Moved to Nevada to live with his brother. And you? Diane looked at the mansion, her mansion, gleaming in the afternoon sun, looked at the garden she'd reclaimed, looked at the life she'd built from wreckage, from disaster, from the ashes of 28 years of marriage. I'm fine, she said, and for the first time in 18 months, it was completely true. Not performed, not forced, not a lie to make others comfortable. Actually true. You know what I finally figured out? Diane said as they walked toward the house. Richard didn't take my life from me. I gave it to him. Piece by piece, decision by decision. I made myself smaller so he could feel bigger. And now? Now I understand that my life was never his to take. It was always mine. I just forgot that for a while. Heavy wisdom for a Wednesday. I've had a lot of Wednesdays to think about it. They settled on the porch with coffee and pastries from the local bakery that supplied the B&B. The morning was perfect, warm, clear, filled with possibility. So what's next? Trish asked. You've conquered the evil ex-husband, reclaimed your house, built a successful business. What does Diane Monroe do for an encore? First, Diane said, I'm keeping my name. I'm not Diane Hartwell anymore. I'm Diane Monroe. Took my maiden name back last month. Really? Really? 28 years is long enough to carry someone else's identity. And second? Second, I'm going back to school, teaching certificate. Remember how I wanted to teach before I got married? Vaguely. Well, I'm 52 years old. If I start now, I can have 10, maybe 15 good years in a classroom. That's not nothing. Trish raised her coffee cup. To Diane Monroe, who drove an ugly car, lived in a shitty apartment, survived a devastating divorce, and came out the other side owning the mansion of her dreams. Our dreams. Vanessa co-owns it. Fine. To Diane Monroe and her unlikely business partner, may all ex-wives be this successful. They clinked cups. The sound rang out. Clear, perfect, true. A car pulled into the driveway. The first guests of the day, arriving for check-in, arriving for their stay in the mansion, in Diane's mansion, in the life she'd built. Diane stood, smoothed her shirt, walked down to greet them with a genuine smile. This was her life now, messy and imperfect and hard-won, built from nothing, built from disaster, built from the determination to never be small again. But it was hers, completely, absolutely hers, and that made all the difference. So that's Diane's story. From a grocery store parking lot humiliation to owning the very mansion her ex-husband lost. From panic attacks in restaurant bathrooms to running a successful bed and breakfast. From making herself small to becoming unstoppable. But here's the thing about stories like this. They only have power when they're shared. When they reach the women who need to hear them. The women sitting in parking lots right now, calculating the cost of air for their tires, wondering if they'll ever be okay again. If Diane's journey resonated with you, if her transformation gave you hope, if her victory felt like yours too, I need your help spreading this story. Hit that like button if you're cheering for women who refuse to stay down. Drop a comment telling me what moment hit you hardest. Was it the parking lot, the panic attack, the auction? I read every single comment, and your stories matter. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. That friend going through a divorce. That sister rebuilding her life. That woman who's forgotten she's capable of extraordinary things. Send it to her right now. This could be the story that changes everything for someone you love. And subscribe to this channel because Diane's story isn't unique. There are thousands of women out there turning disasters into victories, finding strength in the darkest moments, reclaiming the lives they thought were lost forever. I'm here to tell those stories, and I don't want you to miss a single one. Remember, your life was never theirs to take. It was always yours. You just forgot for a while. Until next time, keep rising, keep fighting, keep reclaiming everything that's yours. See you in the next story.